Horus leads the Luna Wolves Legion against the orc-held planetoid of Goro. Joined by the Emperor himself, should they be victorious, their legend shall be remembered for all time. The Emperor is fighting a giant orc empire. Horus Lupercal responds to his call. This was during the Great Crusade, when the sons of Horus were still called the Luna Wolves. The orcs still had that fight in them, and the situation wasn't looking that great. But Sejanus still had a plan. When Abaddon, Tauric, and little Horus brooded, the plan? To trust Horus, of course. Horus joins his Mournival sons, and they discuss what their plan is. There is some banter here and there, and in the end, Horus reveals that they have more ships. Enter a golden ship. A ship carrying the Emperor. The Luna Wolves show their utmost respect to the Emperor. Sejanus is quite amazed to see the Emperor, starstruck at his glory. The Mournival, the Gestarian, and Horus walk to the Emperor, who was accompanied by the Adeptus Custodes. We get a touching moment between Horus and the Emperor, where Horus reminds him of the promise of conquering the stars. On the flagship of Horus, the Mournival gathers, and Sejanus convinces his brothers to do a ritual, to the disdain of Abaddon. "Who are we?" asked Sejanus. "We are the Luna Wolves," said the others. "Beyond that," said Sejanus, almost growling the words. "We are Mournival, bound together by the light of a moon," roared Sejanus, "sworn to a bond that only death will break. We kill for the living," shouted Ezekiel. "We kill for the dead," they cried in unison. Then each of them pointed their swords at the other's neck, forming a square. After that, they would draw oaths of censure, punishments if they failed their mission. Inspired by an old tradition and proposed by Sejanus as a reminder that they need to uphold the principles of the legions, the oaths would be wax sealed upon their armor in secret places. None had been read by now, and Sejanus hoped none would ever be. The Luna Wolves launched their attack without Horus. Horus remains with the Emperor, disappointed that he can't be with his sons. But the Emperor brings Horus, his Terminator guard, and some custodians to a teleporter. Next they found themselves in the heart of the Orc Empire. Horus' previous suspicions of a Techo ruling class were confirmed. The battle has begun. Ezekiel would get wounded, but when Horus pointed that out, he mentioned that the orcs would have to kill him to get him to leave his Primarch's side, as would Horus for the Emperor. Horus nodded. He did not want to insult the pride of his first captain. The scrap world they were on started to fall apart. Horus yelled for his father, who was surrounded by orcs. The Emperor turned to his son and outstretched the hand before getting eaten whole by the world. Sejanus and his men would land of the scrap plant of the Orc Empire, Goro. They didn't know where they were, but orcs came to them, and another fight began. Orcs would die by the number, but they would have ironclad armor warriors to help them fight the Space Marines. Eventually the Luna Wolves would win, and as they moved forward, they would see Horus falling through the world. Horus fell and kept doing so, surviving hits that would have killed a normal Space Marine. He would see his father fight orcs, one so big that it made the Emperor look tiny in comparison. He could not win alone, but he wasn't alone. Sejanus and his remaining men would fight their way to the Emperor. Lupercal would appear soon, as they were close to reaching him. The Emperor almost got killed, but Horus would save him by turning one of his hands toward the blazing core of the dying world. This left the orc armless, and while he was surprised at that, the Emperor used that moment to kill the orc. Horus saw the Emperor as a god and kneeled in front of him. Sejanus would scream the name of Lupercal while getting closer to his father. The core would implode, but the Emperor would use his powers to send it to the ether. This wouldn't last long, he said to Horus when he asked what he had done. Because when the Emperor sent the core away, he showed Horus his true powers. He showed him the Imperium and the Neverborn. On Horus' flagship, he would talk with the Emperor about how the orcs are an ever-growing cancer, and that there is one place that they must strike to defeat the orcs. To strike at Ulanor. On the floor of his workshop aboard the Vengeful Spirit, a remembrancer is dying. As his life slips away, he reflects on the many honors he has received. A silversmith by trade, he has created wondrous artworks to commemorate the various triumphs of the Space Marine legions. The inlay for a commemorative banner in the Imperial Palace, the display box for Ferrus Manus's armored gauntlet. His greatest honor came after he was assigned to the Luna Wolves in the 63rd Expeditionary Fleet, when he was commissioned by Captain Horus Heresy to craft 4 silver rings, each in silver, each set with a polished moonstone. One stone would bear the crescent moon of his own helmet, another the half moon, a third the gibbous, and the fourth the full moon. He would have been paid handsomely, but he refused because he knew for whom the rings were made, the Mournival. Abaddon would bear the full moon, Aximand, called Little Horus by some the half moon, and Torgadon the gibbous. Sejanus would bear the final ring of the new moon. After the rings were done, Sejanus would delay getting them, being caught up with other matters. At the same time, the silversmith was also commissioned by another warrior of the Luna Wolves, one that did not present himself, and the silversmith did not ask for such. He was a blunt-faced man with a deep scar across his brow and a belligerent demeanor. He spoke with words accented with that particular harshness of Chthoniya, so typical of the older warriors of the Luna Wolves. The task was simple, almost beneath the smith, to create a mold with a wolf head and a crescent moon. But the Luna Wolves captain was imposing, and the smith agreed. The next day the captain arrived, inspected the finished mold, and pronounced it perfect. Then he grabbed the throat of the smith. The smith couldn't breathe. He could only ask one question: why? The warrior lowered himself to the smith and gave him an answer that didn't make sense to him. After that he crushed his throat. Now, in the final moments of his life, the silversmith is aware of Captain Sejanus rushing to his side, overturning his work table, and inadvertently crushing one of the Mournival rings beneath his boot, possibly his own. Sejanus calls for medics, while urgently asking the silversmith who attacked him, who did this to him. With his last breath, the silversmith can only whisper the same words his killer said, when the silversmith chokingly asked why. "I can't say."
I was there, the day Horus slew the Emperor.
It is the 203rd year of the Great Crusade, and Horus, the Primarch of the Luna Wolves Legio Astartes, has been Warmaster for barely a year after the Emperor of Mankind retired from the Crusade and returned to Terra. Under Horus, the 63rd Expedition Fleet's first major engagement since his elevation to Warmaster is the pacification of the planet 6319, a human civilization whose sovereign identifies himself as the Emperor of Mankind. For daring to suggest the existence of another emperor, Horus's envoy, Captain Horus Sejanus, is murdered by the Emperor's bodyguards, the so-called Invisibles. There is nothing for it but to make war. The 4 companies chosen at random to spearhead the assault on the Emperor's palace are led by Captains Abaddon, Torgadon, Aximand, and Loken. They are victorious when Horus arrives in person and slays the false emperor. One of the changes introduced by the newly formed Council of Terra is to send remembrancers, historians, poets, artists, and pict-makers, to accompany the expedition fleets and document the glories of the Crusade. One of them, assigned to the 63rd, Mercedes Oliton, develops a rapport with Captain Loken and becomes something of a confidant to him. Garviel Loken is surprised when Abaddon, Torgadon, and Aximand invite him to replace Sejanus as the 4th member of the Mournival, an informal council of advisors to the Warmaster. In private, he consults with his mentor, Iterator Kirill Sinderman, and confesses his doubts about the morality of the war on 6319 and his own fitness for the post. Sinderman tells him this humanity is exactly why the Mournival needs him. While touring the recently conquered capital city, another remembrancer, poet Ignace Carcassy, finds inspiration in seeing the ruins of the planet's older civilization. His verses flow freely, but under the influence of alcohol, they become increasingly morbid and defeatist. Soon he is declaiming aloud, that what they have done to 6319 under the pretense of enlightenment is simple, naked conquest, and how all empires, even the mighty Imperium, are destined to collapse, and he is beaten nearly to death by an enraged squad of the Imperial army that happens to overhear him. Loken's first experience of his place in the Mournival is not only to advise the Warmaster, but to play his part in a political show orchestrated by Horus and his equerry, Malagurst. A final pocket of resistance on 6319 remains in the Whisperhead Mountains. The Imperial army has been unable to crack the rebel stronghold. Loken volunteers the 10th Company to finish the war, and Horus agrees. In private, Rogel Dorn, the Primarch of the Imperial Fists, who is in council with Horus before his legion's withdrawal to Terra, takes Loken aside and confides that he also recommended Loken for the place on the Mournival. His humanity is a necessary counter to Abaddon's bellicosity and Axamen's lofty disdain. But at the same time, the Mournival has a part to play. Horus wanted to unleash the Luna Wolves on the rebels, but wanted someone else to be the one to suggest it. During their approach to the mountain stronghold, the 10th Company and the accompanying units of the Imperial army hear strange whispers. Samus, that's the only name you'll hear. I'm Samus. Samus is all around you. Samus is the man beside you. Samus will gnaw upon your bones. Loken dismisses it as vox distortion, or a useless scare tactic by the rebels. With an assault spearheaded by a squad in the recently issued Terminator armor, the Luna Wolves crack the rebel stronghold with little effort. But at the conclusion of the battle, Loken is contacted by one of his sergeants, Xavier Jubal, claiming he sees Samos. Confused, Loken confronts Jubal in a cave inside the stronghold, talking nonsense. With a smile, Jubal raises his bolter and guns down the Marines accompanying Loken, crowing, "Samus is here." He then attacks Loken, who is forced to kill him. Meanwhile, a small group of remembrancers has finally been allowed to accompany an Astartes expedition on a combat mission, though they have been kept well away from the actual fighting. Loken calls for Cinderman, desperately seeking an explanation for Jubal's behavior. Cinderman theorizes that Jubal was afflicted by some kind of disease which caused him to become delusional. In his delusion, he started repeating the nonsense words broadcast by the rebels. To Loken, this makes much more sense than Jubal claiming to be a demon. Then Jubal rises up with another smile, and his body bloats, becoming monstrous and grotesque, snapping out of his armor. Unknown to Loken, the Remembrancers, led by Euphrati Keeler, have decided to give their army escort the slip and view the carnage at the stronghold for themselves. When the demon charges out of the shadows, it kills 2 of them, and is about to kill Keeler, when Loken intervenes and finally kills the demon. Afterwards, Abaddon debriefs Loken in secret, warning him to keep silent about the events in the Whisperheads. Then Horus arrives in person, ordering his son not to reproach himself. Placed in an unthinkable situation, Loken fought back and won, and his commander is very proud of him. To ease Loken's mind, Horus confides his understanding of what happened. Jubal was possessed by an entity of the warp. They may be called demons, but in reality they are Xenos like any other, just more insidious. Loken is disbelieving, since they are all taught that only psychers, such as librarians, are vulnerable to warp entities. But Horus explains that there are places in the galaxy, the Whisperheads are apparently one of them, where the barrier between the materium and the warp are unusually thin. Part of the reason Horus became Warmaster, he confides, is because the Emperor has withdrawn from the Crusade in an attempt to master the warp. If he fails, then all that the Crusade has accomplished will be for naught. As the Crusade rolls on through the sector, a distress call is received from the Blood Angels force on 14020, the planet grimly dubbed Murder by the last transmission of Captain Kitas Frome, before contact with the Angels force stopped altogether. Both the 63rd Expedition Fleet under Horus and a task force from the Emperor's children respond. The latter arrives first, and its leader, Lord Commander Eidolon, refuses to wait and orders his space marines to drop immediately. Soon, 2 companies of the Emperor's children, commanded by Captains Saul Tarvitz and Lucius, are fighting for their lives against the megarachnids, the planet's insectile inhabitants. Electromagnetic storms have scattered the space marines all over the planet and are blocking Vox communication, making it virtually impossible for them to coordinate their forces. While the 63rd Fleet is en route to murder, Loken must deal with several disturbing revelations. Going through Sergeant Jubal's meager possessions after his death, he finds a medallion showing Jubal's membership in the secret warrior lodges that have spread through several of the legions. Loken forbade his own men to have anything to do with them, and is furious to find out that not only Jubal, but his own trusted second, Nero Vipus, are members. Aximan placates Loken by bringing him as a guest to one of the lodge meetings aboard the Vengeful Spirit. Loken is surprised to find that Torgadon is also a member. Observing the meeting, Loken sees no heathen rituals or seditious plotting. Torgadon explains that the lodge is simply a place where the men of the Legion can gather as equals and speak their minds without regards to rank or unit. They may be Astartes, but fraternity is one very human need that their creators did not breed out of them. Torgadon and Aximan believe that, if anything, the lodges strengthen the Legion, creating bonds of loyalty between men from different companies that might not otherwise exist. Loken is somewhat assuaged, but still has his doubts. The lodges may be benevolent, but they are still secret, and secrecy is anathema to a military organization. Loken finds Kirill Sinderman obsessively browsing the ship's data library for any reading material related to demons. The Iterator, a much reduced man since the events on 63-19, confesses that he has had difficulty focusing on the imperial truth he is supposed to be spreading. Mercedes Olaton asks Loken to sponsor Ignace Carcassi's work, saying that he is a first-rate poet, though less than a perfect human being, and that he tells the unvarnished truth. Loken respects this, even if that truth is unpalatable. Loken is also troubled by an encounter with Euphrati Keeler, who has taken to drinking heavily and sleeping indiscriminately with soldiers aboard the ship. When Loken goes to her quarters to comfort her, she shows him images from her picture. She was given the official explanation that some kind of wild beast got loose in the rebel stronghold, but her images show the truth, a demon wearing fragments of Astartes' power armor. For a moment, Loken is afraid that his orders from Abaddon and Horus will force him to silence her, but to his surprise she gives him the picture and promises to say nothing, trusting that he will do the right thing with them. After he is gone, she opens a shrine hidden in her cabinet and prays to the Emperor as a deity. On murder, chance has allowed the Emperor's children to regain the initiative. The megarachnids had been impaling the bodies of slain Astartes to the enormous, stone-like trees growing all over the planet. Saul Tarvitz insisted on taking the corpses down and destroying the trees, which Eidolon decried as a waste of good explosives. Yet when the trees came down, the electromagnetic storms and Vox distortion begin to clear. By the time the Luna Wolves relief force arrives via drop pod spearheaded by Torgadon's company, destroying the trees has become standard procedure. Torgadon is not impressed by Eidolon's ingratitude, nor by Lucius's loftiness, but quickly forms a bond of kinship with Tarvitz. The war on murder lasts for several months, accelerated by the arrival of a relief force from the Blood Angels, led by Sanguinius in person. Horus is overjoyed to see one of his most beloved brothers again, and both lead the war with gusto. But near the end of the war, with the megarachnids all but exterminated, a strange alien fleet arrives at the planet, transmitting a music-like language. When translated, the message identifies the newcomers as a human civilization called the Interrex, criticizing the Imperial forces for ignoring their warnings. The strange signals being broadcast around murder, it turns out, were warning beacons. The planet was a penal colony where the megarachnids were incarcerated by the Interrex, who say the Imperium could have saved itself the trouble by avoiding the planet altogether. Horus, eager to establish peaceful relations with the Interrex, apologizes to their leaders, to the secret outrage of Abaddon and Eidolon, among others. The expeditionary fleet travels to the homeworld of the Interrex, where they engage in prolonged negotiations. The Interrex, though human in origin, have developed several alien customs and mannerisms from exposure to Xenos species, several of whom have been absorbed into their culture. This alone, argues Abaddon and several of the more bellicose Luna Wolves, is enough reason for them to go to war, but Horus refuses. Yet as the negotiations go on, the Interrex seem determined to keep the Imperium at arm's length, neither promising nor refusing to ally with them. The legions are growing impatient, and many of them pressure Horus to simply conquer them and move the crusade on. In an impassioned speech, Horus describes to the Mournival the time when his father stood with him on Thonia not long after they had first found each other. The Emperor pointed up at the stars and told his favorite son, "Make no mistake, and those stars will be ours." Even Loken is surprised to hear that Horus still blames himself for Sejanus' death on 63-19, and for letting the conflict there descend into violence, despite the others' assurances that he did everything he could. Horus feels the weight of his responsibility as Warmaster terribly, and is adamant that all peaceful means to establish relations with the Interrex must be exhausted, even if it means bending his father's absolute condemnation of xenospecies or those cultures that have had contact with them. Loken is among the Warmaster's entourage when he attends a reception at a dignitary's home. He is drawn into a conversation with a member of the Interrex's guard, who confides that the Interrex have been treading carefully because they feared the taint of chaos in the newcomers. From the Interrex's contact with the Elder, they understand that chaos is a threat like no other, and it would be just like it to come into their space posing as a friend, seeking to worm its way into their confidences and then destroy them. Horus told Loken that there is no fundamental evil at work in the galaxy, but the guard's words resonate uncomfortably with Loken's experiences on 63-19, and he finds himself in understanding with the guard. It seems as if Loken has bridged the gap, and the two sides may now welcome each other as friends. But before the guard can convey this exciting news to his superiors, he receives word of an alarm, a break-in at the Interrex's museum where several dangerous Xenos weapons are kept. Cursing Loken as a deceiver, the guard leaps at him, and though Loken has the chance to kill him in self-defense, he decides to incapacitate him instead, showing mercy. Battle erupts on the streets of the Interrex city as the Luna Wolves are attacked. Horus pleads for ceasefire, but when these are ignored, he rallies his men and charges into the heart of the enemy. Afterwards, Loken relates the story to Oleton. The Legion has subjugated the Interrex, but it is a battle he can take little pride in, having grown out of a stupid misunderstanding. The Interrex believed that the Astartes had stolen an anathami, a semi-sentient weapon created by one of the Interrex's subject races, from the museum, and refused to accept Horus's claims that he knew nothing about it. The one bright spot in the whole sorry affair is that, having seen his commander's courage and nobility, Loken has never been more certain that the Emperor chose the right man to be his Warmaster. The sight of that courage and nobility, he says, is a memory that will stay with him for the rest of his life, even in later years, when to associate courage and nobility with the name of Horus will be the most obscene heresy. Meanwhile, in a hidden recess of the vengeful spirit, First Chaplain Erebus of the Word-Bearers, accompanying the fleet on a diplomatic pretext, examines the anathema he took, and contemplates its galaxy-shaking possibilities. Alone in her quarters, Euphrates Keeler thanks the Divine Emperor for placing humanity's fate in the hands of Horus and his legion, who, after the battle against the Interrex, shall henceforth be known as the Sons of Horus. Oleton asks Loken where the fleet is headed next. He says a small side trip, made at the request of Chaplain Erebus, to a small moon called Davin. The 63rd Expeditionary Fleet, under the command of Warmaster Horus Lupercal rendezvous with elements of the Word-Bearers Legion under First Chaplain Erebus on the planet Davin, which their legions jointly brought into compliance 6 decades ago. They are joined by Petronella Vivar, scion of a Terran noble house who becomes Horus's documentarist. A war council is convened on Davin's surface where Erebus reveals his reason for summoning the Warmaster to the planet. Its planetary governor, Yugen Temba, has turned against the Imperium and betrayed Horus after taking his forces to the planet's moon to put down a rebellion by the Davinite tribes there. Enraged, Horus orders an immediate attack on the moon. Remembrancer Ignis Carcassi reports back on the meeting to his sponsor, Captain Garviel Loken, revealing that Erebus manipulated Horus into becoming enraged at Temba and must have an ulterior motive for wanting Horus to go to the moon. First, Captain Ezekiel Abaddon interrupts the pair, angrily rebuking Carcassi for impugning Erebus's reputation and scorning Loken for keeping company with remembrancers. When Carcassi questions Abaddon about a silver coin he handed to Erebus at the start of the meeting, Abaddon tries to kill him, but Loken holds him off long enough for Carcassi to escape. Later, Loken finds Carcassi and swears him to silence. The Sons of Horus, 1st, 2nd, 5th, 10th, 13th, and 19th companies form the spear tip that will land on Davin's moon accompanied by the Byzant Janizars, 3 titans of the Legio Mortis and Erebus's word-bearers. During the approach, they are unable to detect any of Temba's ships but pick up a ship's broadcast extolling the power of Nergleth, reminding Loken uncomfortably of the Whisperheads incident. Upon landing, the spear tips step out into a stinking, rotted swamp where a dry forest should be, and Loken declares to Tarek Torgeddon that something is very wrong. Advancing through the swamp, the Sons of Horus find the corpses of Temba's men which suddenly animate and attack them. The Legio Mortis Titan dies. Ire is blinded by the thick fog and sensing an incoming aerial object, shoots it out of the sky. The object, Petronella Vivar's skiff that she took to the surface against Horus's orders, crashes in the swamp. Vivar's bodyguard Maggard holds off attacking plague zombies as long as he can, but the pair are only saved when the skiff's burning wreckage acts as a beacon for the Sons of Horus, who marshal around it and slaughter the undead. Moving forward, they discover the wreck of Yugen Temba's crashed flagship, the Glory of Terra, suffering from extreme rot and apparently the source of the unnerving broadcast. Despite Loken's objections, Horus decides to enter with 1st, 5th, 13th, and 19th companies, leaving Loken and Torgeddon's companies to defend the entrance. Once inside, the Sons of Horus are scattered by a shift in the ship's position and Horus is separated from his men. Advancing alone, he encounters a horde of plague zombies whilst a simultaneous attack begins outside the ship. Fighting his way to bridge, Horus finds the bloated monstrosity that was once Yugen Temba, armed with the anathema and sitting over the corpse of Verulam Moy. Engaging Temba in a fight, Horus is wounded in the shoulder before mortally wounding the traitor governor who repents as he dies, confessing that he gave in to the promises of chaos. Horus destroys the machinery powering the broadcast, causing the army of plague zombies to revert to inert corpses just in time to save Loken and Torgeddon's companies from being overrun. The Sons of Horus find Horus on the bridge, mourning the loss of Temba and bleeding freely from his shoulder wound. They carry him outside, where he suddenly collapses to the ground. Grief-stricken and terrified that their commander might die, the Mournival rush the Primarch back to the fleet, where the news has reached the civilian population, who crowd the hangar bay to express their fear and distress. Impeded by the crowds, the desperate Mournival lash out and kill or badly injure the civilians in their path. Ignas, Carcassi, and Mercedes Oliton look on in horror from an observation bay, seeing Euphrates Keeler and a group of others hand out Lectitio Divinitatus pamphlets to the wounded in the wake of the Astartes. Horus is handed over to the Legion apothecaries, who are able to keep him alive but cannot fight the toxins preventing his blood from clotting. Dying, Horus gives Petronella Vivar his valediction, admitting many secrets about the Primarch Brotherhood. Desperate for something constructive to do, Loken and Torgadon return to the glory of Terra to search the bridge for the weapon that wounded Horus, and they are joined by Tybalt Mar, who wishes to see where Captain Moy died. In their absence, the sons of Horus's warrior lodge convene, and Erebus convinces them to entrust Horus to the Temple of the Serpent Lodge on Davin, where he says the lodge's occult magic may be able to heal him. Back on Davin's moon, Loken and Torgadon discover the anathemy, which Loken recognizes as the weapon stolen from the Hall of Devices on Zenobia, leading him to conclude that Erebus was behind Horus's wounding. They return to the fleet but find all its landing ships headed for Davin, where they arrive at the Temple of the Serpent Lodge to find that the Warrior Lodge has interred Horus inside behind doors that only open from within. The Mournival splits down the middle as Loken and Torgadon fall out with Abaddon and Aximand over this course of action, and Loken darkly predicts that they will all come to regret it. Inside the Temple of the Serpent Lodge, Erebus observes the ritual that will send his mind into the spirit world to converse with Horus. In order to complete the ritual, Lodge Priestess Akshub treacherously slits Erebus's throat. Awakening in a verdant meadow, Horus accepts his own death and goes exploring, but is disturbed by glimpses of a hellish industrial wasteland beneath the surface of the landscape. He finds Erebus disguised as Hastur Sejanus, floating face down in a stream, and Sejanus encourages him to flee a pack of wolves with the Imperial Aquila on their fur. Sejanus tells Horus that he has come as an emissary from great powers within the warp, whom he describes as benign and with no interest in the material universe, but under attack by the Emperor, who desires their power for himself. He shows Horus a shrine world from the Imperium in the 40th millennium, where the Emperor and the 9 Primarchs, who will remain loyal in the war to come, are worshipped as gods, but Horus is not, deceiving him with the lie that the Emperor abandoned the Great Crusade in order to obtain godhood, and will leave his sons behind upon his apotheosis. He then takes Horus to the secret laboratories beneath Terra, where the Emperor housed the Primarch Project, revealing that he used knowledge taken from the warp gods to create Horus and his brothers, and has orchestrated a vast lie in propagating his secular creed. The moment of the Primarch's scattering occurs, and Horus's apparition is attacked by custodian guards, but he kills most of them before allowing himself to be sucked into the raging chaos vortex. As days pass in the material universe, nearly the entire 63rd expedition camps outside the Temple of the Serpent Lodge. Loken visits Kirill Sinderman, who has hidden himself away in the Vengeful Spirit's archives, and is horrified to learn of the connection between serpent cults and chaos. Ignace Carcassy, inspired by the Astartes' brutality on the embarkation deck, writes damning poetry about it and begins distributing it throughout the ship. Euphrati Keeler is attacked on Davin by a group of soldiers angry at her commitment to the Lectitio Divinitatus, but is rescued by Torgadon, who brings her to see Sinderman, who now doubts the secular creed and wants to know about the Emperor as a god. They begin translating text from the Book of Logar and accidentally summon a demon. Chief Astropath Ingmei Singh comes to their aid, but they are only saved when, in a miracle, Euphrati channels the Emperor's power and banishes the demon before collapsing into a coma. In the warp, Horus is met by his brother Magnus, the leader of the Wolf Pack, who strips Erebus of his glamour and warns Horus that he is being manipulated into turning on his father and the Imperium. Aware that the visions he has seen are meaningless without context, but mistrustful of Magnus, who is obviously flouting the Edict of Nicaea, Horus asserts his own will and, full of pride, betrayal, and lust for power, decides he will rebel against the Emperor. Healed of his wound, he emerges from the Temple of the Serpent Lodge to thunderous cheers. As the 63rd expedition moves on, Horus and the Lodge begin working towards their new goals. The expedition encounters the Oretian technocracy, an advanced human civilization with many similarities to the Imperium, but Horus slaughters their ambassadorial party on the pretext of an assassination attempt, and declares war on their society in order to seize their highly valuable STCs, which he promises to Adept Regulus in exchange for the Mechanicum's support. The Lodge summon Torgaden to a meeting and lay out a plan to hand over Loken for execution to appease Hector Varvarus, who has been lobbying for justice for the victims of the embarkation deck incident, which will also allow them to silence Ignis Carcassi and his poems. Torgaden refuses to go along and quits the Lodge, declaring his opposition to them. The Sons of Horus are joined by Angron and the World Eaters for the war on the Oretian technocracy, which drags on for a brutal and violent 9 months. A delegation from the Emperor's children pays the expedition a brief visit during which Fabius Bile appropriates the anatheme and hands it over to Fulgrim. 2nd and 10th companies follow the World Eaters through the breach for the final assault on the Oretian fortress, but an explosive trap is detonated that buries Angron beneath tons of rubble. Loken and Torgaden charge into the courtyard, barely holding back from a slaughter, and the last of the Oretian defenders muster to surrender to Hector Varvarus. At that moment Angron bursts from beneath the rubble and attacks, forcing the Sons of Horus to massacre the last of the Oretians, and Varvarus is killed in the firefight. After speaking at Varvarus's funeral, Horus enacts the first of many betrayals by cleaning house. Magard, in awe of Horus and inducted into the Lodge, murders Ignis Carcassi in his room. His death is passed off as a suicide, further distressing Kirill Sinderman and Mercedes Olaton, who hold vigil at Euphrates Keeler's bedside. Horus murders Petronella Vivar himself because he told her too much on his deathbed. Loken and Torgaden decide together that they will fight the spreading evil in their legion until the end. Convening his various supporters in a secret meeting, Horus declares his intention to overthrow the Emperor and begins planning an operation in the Istvan system. Warmaster Horus has fallen to chaos, but his plans of rebellion against the Emperor are known only to a few he trusts to side with him. Primarchs Angron, Mortarion, and Fulgrim of the World Eaters, Death Guard, and Emperor's children respectively have all sided with Horus, and their 4 legions gather in the Istvan system, on the pretense of crushing a rebellion by the Istvanians. The unconscious Euphrates Keeler has developed a cult following who believe the Emperor is a deity and she is a saint, Kirill Sinderman, chief among them. Horus questions Chief Astropath Ing Mei Sing about the saint, and afterwards Sing sends a psychic warning to Sinderman, who recruits Titus Kasser of the Legio Mortis Titan Legion, and his reluctant friend Jonah Arukin to help him save her. Arukin, Kasser, and Sinderman go to rescue Keeler, only to find Magard, former bodyguard of Remembrancer Petronella Vivar turned genetically enhanced enforcer for Horus, about to kill her. Magard attacks them but becomes unable to move, the bullets from his gun moving very slowly, and the 3 men realize that Keeler has awoken and is using her powers to save herself and them. Before Magard can stop them, they carry Keeler to safety amidst the bowels of the vengeful spirit's lower decks. Horus sacrifices Sing in order to facilitate an audience with Chaos as revenge for sending the warning. The Emperor's children and Death Guard attack an enemy station on Istvan Extremis, where they discover a war singer leading the defenders. Death Guard Captain Nathaniel Garrow is badly wounded by the Warsinger's sonic power, but Lord Commander Eidolon is able to kill it with his own sonic shriek. This arouses the suspicion of Saul Tarvitz, who questions Eidolon about it, and is taken to Apothecary Fabius's laboratory, where he is shown the many surgical enhancements Fabius is making on Legion members and offered a place in the new order. Horrified by Fabius's experiments, Tarvitz rejects the offer and leaves. An assault force containing elements of all 4 legions chosen by Horus and including Garvia Loken, Tarek Torgaden, and Lucius descends on Istvan III's capital city, and battle breaks out. Suspicious at the hand-picked nature of the assault force, Tarvitz talks his way into remaining in the fleet when the assault force deploys and investigates the gun decks, where he discovers the ship's crew loading lethal virus bombs into the ship's guns. Realizing that the Marines deployed to the surface are about to be betrayed and wiped out, Tarvitz steals a Thunderhawk and flies for the surface to warn them. He is pursued by members of his own legion who are part of the betrayal and in desperation puts himself at the mercy of Nathaniel Garrow, who is excluded from the assault force and relegated to commanding the frigate Eisenstein due to his injuries. Garrow, an old friend of Tarvitz's, believes him when he tells him of the imminent betrayal and orders the Eisenstein to fire on the Thunderhawks pursuing Tarvitz. The resulting cloud of debris hides Tarvitz from the fleet's sensors as he lands on Istvan, Garrow reporting that Tarvitz is dead before preparing to jump to the warp and bring warning of Horus's betrayal to the Emperor. On the surface, the sons of Horus, World Eaters, Emperor's children, and Death Guard, whom their primarchs deemed too loyal to the Emperor to rebel against him, battle the rebel Istvanians. The sons of Horus's drop pods scatter throughout the target area, and they struggle to link up and capture their objective, the Siren Hold. Lucius leads the Emperor's children half of the attack on the Precentor's palace, while the World Eaters under Captain Erlin become bogged down massacring fanatical citizens in a plaza to the north, and the Death Guard advance through the city's defensive trenchworks. Lucius succeeds in killing the rebel governor, Vardus Prahl, and the Emperor's children capture the palace. Tarvitz then arrives and warns them of their imminent betrayal, tasking Lucius with transmitting a warning to the sons of Horus and Death Guard while he goes to warn the World Eaters. Awakened screaming by a premonition of the virus strike, Euphrates Keeler transmits the vision to Cinderman and Mercedes Olitun, who realize the betrayal that is about to take place. The majority of the Emperor's children and sons of Horus are able to take shelter beneath the palace in time, but few of the World Eaters or Death Guard reach the shelter of bunkers, and more are killed when Horus follows up the virus bombs with an orbital strike that ignites all the gas in the atmosphere, burning the entire planet. Crewing the Daisy Ray in support of the Death Guard, Jonah Arukin and Titus Kasser hear the command to power down and seal their machine, their princeps Esau Turnit being loyal to Horus, and so having received warning. Kasser realizes the truth after they ride out the virus strike and firestorm and attacks Turnit, pleading with Arukin to help him. But his insistence that the Emperor is a god alienates Arukin, who does not believe and chooses ambition over friendship, shooting Kasser dead. In the fleet, Horus gathers the remembrancers from the vengeful spirit and shows them the bombing before ordering his men to open fire, massacring them. Kirill Cinderman and Mercedes Olitun escape alongside Euphrates Keeler when she leads them to Yaktan Cruz, the sons of Horus's elderly and often dismissed third captain, who leads them away from the massacre. The four arrive at the vengeful spirit's hangar and plan to steal a Thunderhawk but are intercepted by Maggard. Cruz and Maggard fight but are evenly matched until Cinderman picks up Maggard's dropped pistol and shoots him in the side, allowing Cruz to finish him off. The four steal a Thunderhawk and flee, guided by Keeler to the Eisenstein, where Nathaniel Garrow takes them aboard. Infuriated by the survival of the Loyalists on the surface, Angron spearheads a World Eater's attack wave to destroy them without waiting for Horus's orders. Angron and his traitor World Eaters assault their Loyalist counterparts, and Tarvitz flees on Erlin's orders to take command of the other survivors. Forced to support Angron, Horus deploys the traitor Emperor's children and Death Guard, turning what was meant to be a single wipeout blow from orbit into a protracted ground war. Tarvitz emerges as a brilliant leader, commanding the Loyalists as they repel wave after wave of traitor attacks while slowly being whittled down. Frustrated and jealous that Tarvitz is getting all the glory, Lucius slays traitor Emperor's children Chaplain Charmosian and uses his helmet microphone to contact Eidolon, selling out the Loyalists in exchange for a place among the traitors. Horus commits the sons of Horus under Sergar Targust and Luxedirai to the battle while sending Ezekiel Abaddon and Horus Aximan to confront their former Mournival brothers Loken and Torgadan. Eidolon launches a devastating attack, penetrating the palace where he massacres the Loyalist wounded. Receiving word of Abaddon and Aximan's arrival, Loken and Torgadan leave the palace. Loken being attacked by Karn until a Sons of Horus's tank drives over them and impales Karn on its dozer blades. Tarvitz finds Lucius among the corpses of Loyalist Emperor's children and discovers his betrayal. The pair fight, and Tarvitz is hopelessly outmatched until he copies something Loken once did when fighting Lucius in the practice cages and drops his weapon in favor of punching Lucius in the face. A squad of Loyalists arrive and open fire on Lucius, but he manages to escape. Leading the surviving Loyalists he pulled out of the fight, Tarvitz takes advantage of Eidolon's undisciplined attack and manages to repel the assault. Loken and Torgadon confront Abaddon and Aximand in the ruins of the city's parliament building. The confrontation splits into two duels as Loken fights Abaddon and Torgadon fights Aximand. Outclassed against Abaddon, Loken knows he needs Torgadon's help to win, but Aximand kills Torgadon, leaving Loken helpless. Abaddon grievously wounds him, but before he can finish Loken off the dais, Irai steps on the building and brings the roof down. Abaddon pulls Aximand from the rubble, noting his sorrow at murdering Torgadon, and believing Loken dead, they return to the fleet. With the Loyalists all but destroyed, the traitors fall back, and Horus firebombs the city from orbit. Tarvitz and the scant few survivors bracing for the end, knowing that they hurt the traitors and bought time for Garrow to reach Terra. Buried beneath the rubble of the Parliament building, the last thing that Loken sees is the bombs falling towards him. Lord of the Red Sands, Lord of the Red Sands. Many are the legends surrounding the wrathful Primarch of the 20th Legion. From the bloody sands of the Deshaean gladiatorial pits to the battlefields of Istvan and the farthest reaches of the Shadow Crusade, the name of Angron is a byword for carnage and berserk fury. Angron, gladiator Primarch of the 14th Legion, is renowned across the galaxy for his savagery and brutal martial code. But amidst the ruins of Istvan III, even as he slaughters his own wayward sons, he finds a unique serenity in the carnage of warfare, no matter whose blood he spills. And for what does the Eater of Worlds hunger above all else? Nothing more than freedom. On Istvan V, Angron rampages across the battlefield, slaughtering the loyalists of the Emperor's children, the Death Guard, and his own World Eaters. One of his last victims is his captain, Koragar, who manages to inflict a small wound to his Gene Father's throat before being struck down. The wound is not enough to slow the Primarch down, much less kill him, but it is more than most of his victims have managed, and Angron is pleased. As a kindness, he stays with Koragar as he dies. The captain, with his last breath, asks his father why he now fights for Horus. Angron says he does not. He learned on Nuceria that the one and only thing worth fighting for is freedom, and now Angron is a free man, no longer the Emperor's slave. There is only one thing worth fighting for. Angron stands and fights the warriors that come from the dead city on Istvan. Some warriors the spawns of his brothers, like Fulgrim or Mortarion. Some are his own sons. They charge dreaming of glory, but find only death and shame at the hands of the Red Angel. Those smart enough to retreat get hunted by Angron. Some of his own sons shoot him from the back and try to disarm him, but Angron manages to kill them all. The bodies of the fallen loyalist sons gather one on top of the other, forming a monument at the feet of Angron, a mountain of bodies. He wonders what tyrant first dreamed of conquest, comparing the Emperor and Horus, likening them as being the same. Thinking of the sacrifices of thousands of civilizations that once lived freely, now forced to be slaves to the Emperor or later on Horus. Conquest is as meaningless as glory. Worse, it is evil in its selfishness. Both are triumphs only in a fool's crusade. Angron walks to his prey, a centurion from the World Eaters, laying with his back against a wall, innards on his leg. He was supposed to be dead, but he defiantly raised his bolter to his primak. Angron pushed it aside with his axe. His loyal sons chanted his name in the ruins of the city. The centurion presents himself. "I am here, Koragar." The World Eater draws in a shivery breath, surely one of his last. His remaining eye seeks his Primarch's face. "That wound at your throat," Korrigar's words come with blood bubbling at his lips. "That was me." Angron touches his wounds and smiles. He then commends his son for fighting well. They all fought well. The centurion wants to know, why did he join the arch-traitor? Angron says he fights against the emperor, but the centurion breathes his last breath. Angron closes the eyes of his son. He leaves and finds his sons cheering his name the same way the masters of old cheered for him when he slew a beast. He knew this was not freedom, not yet, but it was a start. He wanted to teach the emperor an important lesson. As his dying breath would come and he would see Angron's smile, he would learn that freedom is the only thing worth fighting for. It is why tyrants always fall.